Nazi Germany was responsible for millions of deaths. The huge majority of its victims were people who were killed without any form of due process, or even for that matter, a crime. These people were either gunned down or shipped off to camps where they were killed. The Holocaust, for example, had a security classification the equivalent of top secret, although it was no secret in the occupied territories of Central and Eastern Europe. However, other killings of opponents, chiefly political opponents, had to have a deterrent value, so therefore they were given the maximum publicity possible. I've done a number of videos relating to the German resistance, as well as the people who executed them and what I would term the legal perpetrators, the lawyers who worked in the service of National Socialism to kill the resistance. Here I'm going to attempt to briefly answer the question as to why there were so many death sentences in Nazi Germany, which were done through the courts, and in my opinion this was largely because of a phenomenon which has been called anticipating the wishes of the Fuehrer. As everywhere in Europe, the death penalty existed in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1926, a Polish farm labourer, Józef Jakubowski, was executed and almost certainly was innocent. This scandal led to calls for the abolition of the death penalty in Germany, and the number of executions declined. However, in 1933 Hitler came to power, and this led to a very rapid increase in state-sponsored killing, not only by political units such as the SA, but also in formal leading proceedings. During the National Socialist era, investigations against political opponents were in the hands of the Gestapo. Like the Stasi that followed it, or the Russian intelligence apparatus today, potential opposition figures were followed both at home and abroad. Additionally, as World War II progressed, the Gestapo had not only to keep an eye on the opposition in the occupied countries, but also on the millions of foreign workers, both voluntary and forced, who were living in the Third Reich. Once a person had been arrested and interrogated by the Gestapo had a variety of choices as to what to do with that person. If guilt or future opposition was likely, then the person could be sent to a concentration camp, and that was completely outside of any judicial control. The head of the Gestapo at the local branch could handle it as he saw fit, and local Gestapo bosses were party functionaries, although those under their command might just be officers of the criminal police who had been posted to the Gestapo. The Gestapo could also refer a case to the public prosecutor. The prosecutor could then decide how the case would proceed. A case could go to court, and in the unlikely event of an acquittal, the accused could then be arrested and end up in a concentration camp, or alternatively be sent to prison, and once that sentence was up, the victim could then be sent to a concentration camp. There are even cases where the sentence was served and the prisoner released. Alternatively, the matter could be taken away from the Gestapo by some other organisation of the state. For example, in the case of the White Rose, the People's Court directly ordered the Gestapo to hurry up and hand everything over they had on the Schürl siblings. The Schürls had been arrested on the Thursday, interrogated over that day and Friday and the weekend, and then handed over to the People's Court on the Monday, which sentenced them to death and had them executed the very same day. The Public Prosecutor's Office also decided on what to do about those political offences that were referred to it by the Gestapo. Political offences included participation in resistance organisations, or even just possession or distribution of anti-Nazi materials, as was the case with the White Rose. Even listening to foreign broadcasts was considered a political offence, which could lead in the death sentence. These political offences were assigned to the People's Court, the higher regional courts, and the special courts. In this way, these courts took on a significant role in the National Socialist persecution of not only the German people, but also those people living in the territories occupied by the National Socialist regime. All higher regional court districts had special criminal chambers for political crimes. The so-called special courts had been set up at the very beginning of the National Socialist dictatorship. These courts had been set up to deal quickly with politically related cases. For example, 4 people had been arrested in the aftermath of the Bloody Sunday Altona disturbances in 1932. They had been tried in the autumn of that year and found not guilty based on the evidence. The following year, after the Nazi seizure of power, they were put on trial again in a special court which did not need evidence as much as political necessity. Blood was needed for blood. 2 Nazis had died in these disturbances, and the 4 men were sentenced to death. The central court in the prosecution of political resistance and behaviour that did not conform to the system during the Nazi era was the People's Court. The People's Court was set up in July 1934, ironically enough just after the mass killings of the SA leadership. It convicted a total of 15,519 people in 7,022 proceedings, of which 5,279 were sentenced to death. This means that more than 1 person in 3 who came before the People's Court ended up being executed. Almost half of those convicted were opposition members of the occupied countries. 95% of all the death sentences were imposed as from 1942. The jump in the number of death sentences was not just a consequence of the increasing barbarization of society during wartime. The bombing of German cities had started in 1940 but was beginning to gather in intensity, whilst the German army had suffered a major defeat during the previous winter on the Eastern Front, meaning that the war was likely to last much longer than forecast. The most important reason for the increase in death sentences, in my opinion, was due to anticipating the will of the Fuehrer. On the 26th of April 1942, Hitler made his first speech in the Reichstag since the 11th of December 1941, when he'd gone there to declare war on the United States, and the following day had told his cronies of the Holocaust. His speech on the 26th of April 1942 is worth considering, as it was at this moment that the death camps at Belzec and Sobibor had just started to mass murder people, and the death camp at Helmler nad Neren had already probably killed tens of thousands of people. Hitler openly states that only National Socialism knew how to deal with the racial question, and I would suggest a very clear indication was given by him on that day to those in the know that the Holocaust was proceeding. Hitler also accused the judiciary of excessive leniency in his Reichstag speech of the 26th of April 1942. His words were, "I expect that German jurisprudence understands that the nation is not there for them, but they are there for the nation. Germany has to live, irrespective of the formal interpretation of justice." Just to mention one example, that for instance a criminal who married in 1937 and then mistreated his wife so much that she became mentally deranged, and then who died as a result of his mistreatment, is sentenced to 5 years of hard labour at a time when 10,000 brave German men have to die to save the homeland from Bolshevism. That means to protect their wives and children. I will take a hand in these cases from now on and direct the orders to the judges that they recognise what I order is right. Hitler's not telling them to sentence opposition fighters to death, just mentioning their leniency, and that henceforth he will tell them how severe sentences have to be. It was for the judges to anticipate the will of the Fuehrer, and as such gave death sentences to please him. In addition, within a few weeks it was clear to even the Nazis at the top that they could fall victim to the very reign of terror they were bringing on others when the Czech resistance managed an assassination attempt on Reich Protector Reinhard Heydrich, which led to his death. In 1942, the People's Court fell under the control of Roland Freisler, a fanatical Nazi bent on humiliating and killing the enemies of the regime. The People's Court was not made up of professional judges. Only the court chairman and one assessor had to be professional judges. The 3 other judges could be from the police, Wehrmacht, or even the party for that matter. They were handpicked to ensure their loyalty to the regime and not to jurisprudence. The judges of the People's Court were appointed on the suggestion of the Reich Minister of Justice, who in turn was appointed by Hitler. Appeals against judgments of the People's Court were not permitted. The convicted person had only the opportunity to ask for the death penalty not to be carried out in a formalised clemency process, although such appeals as a rule were hopeless from the start, although there were cases where the death penalty was waived in favour of life imprisonment. After liberation, no judge from the People's Court did any serious jail time. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours, and sometimes I upload at other times as well. And so if you want to know when I'm uploading at other times as well, then the best way is to subscribe. My specialist area in history is the Holocaust, but I also talk about other subjects as well, related above all to World War II, but sometimes around other things such as communism, the current war in Ukraine, and others. So thanks for listening, and for the moment, bye from me.